Dear students, the next topic of our first chapter is Colonization of India. As we discussed earlier in the same chapter that India was a colony of British. So now what is the meaning of colony and does what the meaning of colonization of India? Let us start. When one country is ruled by another, many political, economic, social, and cultural changes take places in the colonized country. This process is called colonization. So, it is very simple definition that when we can say it is colonization, so a country that is ruled by another country, and so many changes occur, like political, economic changes also, changes in their society also, and in the culture also. So such kind of changes occur due to some other country is ruling on a particular country. That is called colonization. And these changes take place in colonized country. Again, the country which is ruled by another country is called its colony. So for example, India was a colony of British because India was colonized by British. And British were ruling on us. And not only they were ruling on us, but because of their rule, there took place many changes like political, cultural, social, economic, many kind of changes were there. That is why we were identified as colony of British. And the country who rules is called imperialist country. Right? So India was colony of British and British was the imperialist because British was ruling on India. The imperialist country colonizes in order to derive maximum benefit for itself by exploiting the economy of its colony. So it is a rule or it is but obvious, it is very clear that the imperialist country, it means the country which rules, it colonizes in order to derive maximum benefit. What is the reason why one country rule on another country? However, nowadays it is not possible directly because of the rules of UN, United Nations, that all the countries are having right to remain independent. So nowadays no any country can rule on another country directly. But at that time, we are just talking about before 200 years. So at that time there was no any such kind of arrangement, and there used to attack the country by another country, and many countries were ruled by British and many other countries also. So why they colonize the country? Because they want some benefits, maximum benefits from their colonized country. Right? For example, India was colony of British. So why British came over here and why British ruled over India? If there would not have been anything in India, then why would have they come to India? India was rich in terms of minerals, in terms of even education, gold, all the things. So that is why agriculture also. So that is why Britishers colonized us, Britishers ruled on us, and they took maximum benefits for them only. They exploited us. Okay, next. Following the Industrial Revolution, England's industrial production increased within a short span of time. So after the Industrial Revolution that took place in England. So what is the meaning of Industrial Revolution? It is given. Industrial Revolution means changes in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, transportation and technology that affected the social, economic and cultural milieu of Europe between 18th and 19th century. So during that time, between 18th and 19th century, industrial revolution took place. It means it was the time when different technologies started coming out. And that technology, they started using it in ranging from agriculture to manufacturing process. So tasks were being completed very quickly, and manufacturing process manufactured more pieces compared to the manual process, because this process was machine oriented process, mechanical process. So obviously when the manufacturing increases, so it affects our life. So at that time their life affected. They were very comfort. There were very comfort in their life because of this industrial revolution. So we'll not go much over there. After industrial revolution, England's industrial production increase. Obviously increase because industrial revolution means mechanical and technological advantage they started using. So production will increase, and it increased within a short time, very short time. So the need to control territories that would serve as markets for their products and also supply raw materials for their domestic industries resulted in the colonization of many non-European countries by England. So that was also a reason why they came over here. The very first purpose is trade, and by doing trade, why they started controlling Indian subcontinent, it was their need to control the territory. And why they needed to control the territory like India? Because India was rich of minerals, agricultures, and much more thing. And India was at that time also a big market also, right? So what they were producing by machines, their production increased, and they were not having bigger population as India was having. So machines are continuously producing things. Now what to do for supply? All the things that were produced by their machines were not supplied in England because it was more than enough. So what to do of remaining supply? So they started controlling other countries, and as we know the definition of colonization, they colonized many countries and they started changing their cultures. And when colony countries' cultures changed, they started demanding the things that were produced in Europe. Let us see. So many non-European countries controlled by England. That was how India became a colony of England. So that was the reason that India was a colony of England. Let us see how this happened. So let us see. You can see a picture, East India House of London City. It was around 1800. In 1600, now the crucial point is there. In 1600 CE, CE means Common Era, a group of English traders founded the English East India Company, that is EEIC. You should remember this acronym, right? In London. So in 1600, some English traders made a company named English East India Company, London. A royal charter was granted to it by Queen. Said the then Queen at that time, Queen granted, it means Queen gave the charter. Charter, it means permission. And the royal, the word royal, it means related to king or queen or its family. A royal charter was granted to it by Queen Elizabeth I of England. Earlier, Thomas Roe, the envoy of King James I of England, got certain trading rights for the EEIC, that is English East India Company, from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. So we can say that why in 1600 English East India Company founded itself, because before that Thomas Roe, the envoy of King James. Now what is the meaning of envoy? Let us see. You must develop habit of seeing this special word meaning. Ambassador or representative. It means a person who represents king, queen or family or country. That is called envoy. Envoy word is being used today also. Clear? King James I's envoy Thomas Roe, he got certain trading rights. He got some rights, some permissions from the then Mughal king, Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And after that, Mughal Emperor Farooq Shah granted important trading rights to the English merchants through the royal Farman. Then also, one more emperor, Farooq Shah, he also gave some permission for the trading rights to English merchants. Merchants means businessmen, English traders, through a royal Farman. Farman, it means order. And royal, as you know, royal means related to king or queen or family. So royal Farman, it means order from king's family. So that was the anticipation of why India was colonized. We need to know the history, we need to know the root, right? So in 1600, company was founded, and before that, company's person, Thomas Roe, envoy of king, who got the permission of Jahangir, and later Mughal Emperor Farooq Shah also gave some permission to English merchants through the Farman. So let us see what happened next. Next is India under colonial rule. So what happened to India under colonial rule? What changes were there? Right? We should not forget the definition of colonization, because as India was colonized by British, so there were many changes. Some were willingly, some were unwillingly, some were forcibly. Many changes took place in Indian society, Indian political, Indian economical, many aspects there were changes. So let us start. The major developments in India under colonial rule included political, economic, social and cultural changes. So students, it suggests that in India, when India was in under the colonial rule, many changes were there. In some changes, developments were also there. So now it is our wish that how we regard that. Some say that Britishers were here for our goodness, but as you just deep in the history of India, that you will come to know that what Britishers have actually done to us. Let us get back to the point. So that developments were political, economical, society level also, and some cultural also. The period also witnessed the rise of Indian nationalism. So that was very crucial period also, because at that time Indian nationalism feeling was rise. Right? At that time, many Indian nationalists were there who started thinking that today or tomorrow we must free our country from the jaws of Britishers. Let us study these developments in detail. First is political development. What were political developments during that time under Britishers? The establishment of British Indian Empire marked the most significant political change during the colonial period. So, during that time when India was the colony of British, some British Indian Empire establishment were there, and due to that, they were identified as most significant political change. It means most important political change was there during that time. Which time? Colonial period. What is colonial period? India was colonized by Britishers. India was ruled by Britishers. That is why India was called colony of British. Let us see. In 1757, the Indian subcontinent was divided into several kingdoms and provinces. Right? So just try to recall the thing. When the royal charter was granted in 1600. In 1600 it was granted. They just came to India. They just started asking the permission for trade from the Mughal emperors, and they gradually started trading in India. After some time, after some years, they started controlling over Indian territory. We'll come to know after in the next chapters that when, where, and how India was colonized by British, why and how the territories were controlled, and by whom. But in 1757, Indian subcontinent was divided into several kingdoms and provinces. Many states were there, many princely states were there, many kingdoms were there. Over the next 190 years, so after that time, the British established direct rule over large parts of India. Why the year 1757 is discussed over here? Because we'll see that Battle of Plassey was won by Britishers. That was the first victory, major victory of British in India against Mughals. That is why they started controlling Indian territory from 1757, and for next 190 years. Why it has been discussed, why it has stated 190 years? Because if you add 1757 plus 190 is equal to 1947. And what happened in 1947? We got independence. So over the next 190 years, the British established direct rule over large parts of India gradually, or we can say very quickly. Britishers, by their means of sometimes cunningness, sometimes smartness, they were thinking very hard about controlling territory. So they started taking direct rule over large part of India, and almost during these 190 years, they control over almost all the parts of India except some small parts. They indirectly ruled over all other local kingdoms, right? So indirectly ruling means they were not exactly ruling the some parts, but they were indirectly ruling, because in whichever parts they were not ruling, those kings did not dare to challenge Britishers, because Britishers were at that time a mighty power, right? Or the princely states. So what the term suggests? Princely states, the state which were ruled by princes, prince or kings. It means the states which were not directly under the colonial rule, they were also saluting Britishers. Why? So some were afraid of losing their states, because British was a mighty power and challenging British was not a easy task. That may be the possible case. Let us see. Till 1857, the EEIC. What is the meaning of EEIC? English East India Company ruled the conquered territories in the Indian subcontinent. So from 1757 to 1857, 100 years, the company itself ruled over the Indian subcontinent. That means India was controlled and ruled by a company, not a country. Students, remember, for 100 years, company ruled over country till 1857, from 1757 to 1857. Thereafter, the British Crown exercised direct control, and then after British government, that British Crown, it means Queen controlled the India for 90 more years. Another important development was the rise of an organized opposition to British rule by Indians. Some more important development was also there. It was rise of an organized opposition to British rule by Indians. As we discussed earlier there, many were fed up of British rule because British were very biased and very injustice. They were doing very injustice to Indians. Right? So due to that, many nationalist leaders and many ordinary people also rose to oppose the British. But if they wanted to defeat the British, they wanted to have organized opposition. The British could not be defeated by any rough planning. So there was a rise of an organized opposition also. Initially, in starting, it was led by local zamindars that oppose, that revolt. It was led by, initially, it means at starting it was led by local zamindars. Then peasants, sepoys. Sepoy is the derived word from Hindi. Sepoy, it means soldiers. And tribal people. So initially the oppose was from these four categories: zamindars, peasants, sepoys and tribal people. It means all the categories were ordinary except zamindars. Later it became more organized under English educated groups, collectively known as the Nationalists. So later this feeling to free the country from the jaws, from the hands of Britishers, it became stronger and stronger. Why it became stronger? When English educated Indians included themselves in the oppose, right? Because English education was imparted in Indian subcontinent. So many students, many Indians started getting English educations, and when they started getting English educations, they started reading the books of French revolutions, of many other revolutions which took place in Europe and other parts of India. And they came to know that why we have been slave of British since more years. We need to free ourselves from Britishers. So they were called nationalists. They were English educated groups. They started opposing British to free their country. Next, the establishment of a constitutional, administrative, legal, military and political structure through which the British ruled India was also an important political development during colonial period. So as we discussed earlier that before the arrival of Britishers, there was no any uniform culture all over Indian subcontinent. There were nearby 600 or more than that princely states there, and there were no same rules for or in those princely states. So there were no uniformity. But when Britishers started ruling over India, they started practicing the uniform culture, uniform administrative culture, uniform legal culture, uniform constitutional. Uniform means same for all, same rules for all over the country, as right now we are practicing, right? Same military culture. So before the colonization, there was no same military culture also. Some king was having that kind of military, another king was having different category military, and even political structure also. So Britishers were having such kind of uniform political development, administrative development, legal development also. There were different laws. For example, Morbi was a state. So in Morbi, some laws were there which were totally different from Rajkot or Gondal state. So there was no even legal rules uniformity. But when British colonized India, they started practicing uniformity. Right? So that was also a significant change. Right? You can see when we see the word sepoys, right? So sepoy in English language, many words are derived from, you will be surprised to know that in English language 40% of words are derived from other language, right? So now you can decide that whether English is rich or other languages are, right? So look at the photograph of sepoys of the English East India Company. Compare their appearance and uniform with a modern day soldier of Indian Army. So you can easily compare, right? They were having some in soldiers also different ranks were there, subedar, and that many soldier ranks were there. So according to ranks, they were having different uniforms. So you can easily compare, right? Today's soldier is having extra modern appearance than there, right? Let us see second. Economic changes. The most important development in the economic sphere came about in the land revenue system. Economic, it means related to money. Economy of India, it means how the money system around the country. So in that, the most important development, it was came about land revenue system. Land, and revenue, it means taxing system, a source of income for the government. Land revenue was most important source of income for the government. The British officials surveyed the countryside and fixed the land revenue. At that time, what British officials did? They surveyed the countryside. To survey, it means to observe. To observe different lands, farms, and much more fields. On that base, the survey is noted in different notebooks. So countryside, it means villages. They surveyed villages and they fixed the land revenue. For example, after coming to particular farm, the British will tell that farmer that on the base of your size and the crop you are practicing, you have to pay such amount as a tax. That is called fixing the land revenue. Generally, land revenue was fixed at very high rates, leading to hardship, frequent famines, and rebellions. So, what were the criteria? How it was fixed? So, generally, it was fixed at very high rates. So, obviously, Britishers came over here for trading, and later they started exploiting us. So, they were not thinking good of us. That is why they were not feeling any hesitation on fixing high rates. So they were fixing high rates for tax. Now just take an example. If your father is earning 1 lakh per month, and if your father has to pay some 5 to 7,000 rupees as a tax, then there would not be any problem. But if government says that your father has to pay tax of 45 to 55,000 rupees, then half of the earnings have to be paid as a tax. So it is not fair, it is very unfair. So at that time also, Britishers were practicing very unfair means like this. Frequent famines. At that time, technology was not there. We cannot predict the temperature, we cannot predict the environment, right? We cannot predict anything that how it will be, how rain would be this year. So many famines were there. Famines, it means very acute shortage of rain, and due to shortage of rain there is no any kind of agricultural production, and due to that kind of scarcity is there, that is called famine. And sometimes rebellions also were there.
sometimes due to some injustice and some unfairness, people create rebel against the government. So rebellion, it means to oppose the government. Initially, the main items taken from India and sold in Britain were spices, calico, and fine cotton cloths called muslin. So muslin, it means fine cotton cloths, a high quality cotton cloths called muslin. It is very smooth cloth. So at starting, this kind of main items were taken from India. It means purchased from India, and it was sold in Britain, right? Spices that we called masala, calico, it means clothes, and fine cotton clothes also. These items were in great demand in Britain and usually paid for in bullion. So these items in Britain were sold at great demand. In Britain, there was a great demand of this item. And it was paid for in bullion. It means as an exchange. Right now in India, currency is rupee. At that time, also currency was rupee. But different princely states were practicing different currencies. But at that time, these spices, calico, muslins were exchanged for a bullion. Now, what is the meaning of bullion? Let us see. Gold or silver in bulk before coining. Right? So, they were exchanged with gold or silver. So, India was getting gold or silver in exchange of calico, muslins, spices, and other things. Later, many Indians were forced to cultivate opium that was then exported by the British to China in lieu of tea. In lieu of, it means in exchange of tea. So after that, many Indians were forced. Obviously, why they were forced? Because India was a colony of British and British were ruler. So just because they were ruler, they were ruling on us very hardly. So some cultivators were forced to cultivate opium. Opium is called in Hindi, it is afin. The opium that was then exported by the British to China, right? So they were forced to cultivate opium, and then it was exported. Export, it means to sell outside the country in China, right? And then it was exchanged with tea. So in the exchange of opium, China was giving us tea. So behind this, the main purpose of the English East India Company was to promote the trade of products manufactured in England. So what was the purpose behind this? So company wanted to promote its trade. All the time, company was thinking of its trade only. Remember, when company came to India, company did not think of ruling over India. But when company started feeling that if we do not control these territories, we will not be able to trade smoothly, then company started ruling over the country. They started taking over small territories and then large part of India just because of trade. So it wanted ultimately to increment their trade. That is why they started doing such things, right? You can see over here. It is a painting. At that time, it was a big trend of painting, an 18th century painting of a woman wearing fine muslin clothes, as we discussed. What is muslin, right? Fine quality cotton. Let us see. When India became a full-fledged colony, it means almost all the parts of India was colonized. It exported raw materials such as jute and cotton to England for the British factories in Scotland and Manchester. So these kind of things like jute and cotton were exported as a raw material to the England and other European or British factories in Scotland and Manchester. Scotland is a country and Manchester is a city of England, right? So as a raw material, it means over there, as we discussed earlier, industrial revolution was there. So due to industrial revolution, manufacturing process was done by machine, and as the machine does not rest, so machine continuously manufacture the things, and when machine manufacture things, it takes very little time. So machine wants or need or requires raw materials very quickly. So India started exporting raw materials such as jute and cotton to England for their factories. Then the finished goods made at these factories were then sold back to Indians at price much higher than that. Right? So at that time, Indian raw materials was exported to British, and then whatever the finished goods made from that raw materials, it was sold back to Indians at a much higher price than that, right? So it was regarding raw materials. Much higher price than those at which the raw materials were bought from India. Clear? So there was a huge margin British was practicing. Overall trade, which had initially favored India, became unfavorable. So before the arrival of Britishers, India was also the center of trade in the world, but India was gaining a lot. But after India was colonized by the Britishers, all the advantages were sucked by Britishers, then India was on a losing note. So it was not favorable, it was the most unfavorable condition for India, because Indian raw materials were exported at very lower price, and from that whatever finished goods were there, it was again sold back to India at very higher price. Another change came about due to deindustrialization. Now you see the meaning of industrialization, and the reverse meaning of that is deindustrialization. Deindustrialization, it means decline of industries. Let us see the definition. Deindustrialization led to the destruction of traditional industries like weaving, pottery, iron smelting, and brass works, which often posed a challenge to British trade and manufacturing. So at that time, deindustrialization was there, and because of deindustrialization, destruction of traditional industries, our Indian traditional industries were there, in that no machines or mechanization were used, man-made goods were there, more and more humans were involved in manufacturing process. Which industries it was? Like weaving, pottery, right, iron smelting, and brass working. These all are in all industries where Indian traditional industries, they had to face the challenge from British trade and manufacturing, because at the other hand, British manufactured goods were very comparatively very cheap and easily available and quickly available and bulkily available. So these handmaids, and they were very fine quality compared to these handmade things. So they were kind of deindustrialization in India because of this. So this was. Now next, social changes in society. Some important social changes took place during this period. During that period, some changes were there, they were very important. They dealt with issues of the caste system, tribal societies, and treatment meted out to women. So those issues in society, some issues were there, so they were very negative also. So these social changes dealt with some issues regarding caste system, tribal societies, it means Adivasis, and some treatment dealt with women. So women's condition was not very well during that time. Widespread reform movements were led by social reformers such as Raja Ram Mohan Rai, then Dayanand Saraswati and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. These three reformers led Indian society, Indian social change. Many Indian social changes were there due to these three reformers. These three reformers, directly or indirectly, were responsible for the social changes of India. Some significant legislations were passed by the British government. Legislations means laws. Some important laws were passed during that time, because during that time Indian society was suffering from some rumors, some superstitions, sorry, not rumors, superstitions. Because of that, there was a kind of disadvantages in Indian society. So some laws were passed that banned sati, as we discussed earlier. What is the meaning of sati? Encourage widow remarriage. At that time, sati was practiced very highly, and in some areas, if sati was not practiced, then the woman whose husband has died, her life was that level miserable that she started thinking that if I would have died after my husband, that would be good. Because in the society, women were not seen very good way if she becomes widow. She was seen as a symbol of unluckiness, right? Then, so Britishers passed a new law that encouraged widow remarriage, prevented child marriage. At that time, children were get married at very low age. So British passed a law that now children would not be got married. Regulated education of the girl child. At the time, the society was so stringent that parents would not allow a girl child for the education. So British government passed laws regarding girl child can also have an education. Another important change was an effort to integrate tribal people into mainstream society. Tribal means Adivasis. They were living very isolated area. So over there development did not reach. So due to these reformers, respectable reformers, Britishers passed some laws in order to make the tribals to come into the mainstream. Mainstream, it means a society where very social people live, educated people live, organized society live. Over there, tribals are also welcome. Next, another set of changes affected the Indian educational system. That was the education system. British required a large number of people to run different levels of administration, because Britishers did each and everything very finely, very smartly. So they just started surveys, they started analysis and observations, all these things, and on that base they started finishing their task or assigning their task. So they wanted a large number of people to run at different levels of administrations. Yes, to administer the people, they need more and more employees. So therefore they overhaul the traditional system of education, leading to the birth of an English educated middle class in India. So they wanted employees for their administration, and Indian educated people were not able to serve the administration Britishers were having. So what Britishers did, they started trying to change the Indian education, and They were successful. And what was their purpose? If Indian people will start getting English education, then Britishers will be able to successfully satisfy the need of the employees, that is educated middle class in India. This class not only produced bureaucrats to serve the British rulers, but it gave rise to some outstanding leaders of Indian national movement also. So it is something like that. British purpose was to literally find servants for them. Servants for them. Right? But after getting some English education, some nationalists started doing movement of freedom movement to free their country, that is Indian national movement. So next topic is Indian nationalism. The term nationalism signifies a great love for one's motherland and a desire to liberate it from foreign rule. So what is the meaning of nationalism? It means that Rashtravad. What is the meaning of Rashtravad? To love our country, motherland, Matrubhumi, and to desire, it means to wish, to will, to liberate, it means to free from foreign rule. So if we desire to free our motherland from foreign land or foreign rule, that is called nationalism. Western education, that is English education, brought in ideas of democracy, equality, liberty, and nationhood. So as we discussed earlier, that some Indians were started imparting English education. So while studying or learning English education, they started developing a sense of democracy, equality, because Indians were not dealt with equality, as we discussed earlier in the same chapter. Liberty, Indians were not liberalized because Indians were slave or colonized of Britishers. And nationhood, there should be a nation, because before arrival of Britishers, India was not India. It was a group of some around 600 princely states. So when Indians started imparting English education, Indians started developing a sense of nationhood, sense of democracy, sense of equality, and much more, which inspired educated Indians to question the British rule. Now they started questioning the British rule, that why are you ruling over us? In many parts of world, other countries are being liberalized by you, whereas you are continuously ruling on us since so many years. Now we need our country free from you, so go back. So that was nationalism. So after their arrival, this was also there. The educated Indians felt that it was the right of Indians to determine the manner in which they should be governed. So some Indians were also believing that right now we are not ready to govern our country ourselves. Right? We are not ready to rule on our country, but the way Britishers are ruling over us, they need to change their way. They are ruling on us very rudely. So they need to consider our all needs and requirements also. So why this sense? Why they started developing this kind of feeling and expressions and sense? Because they started English education. So the development of the concept of India as a nation and Indians as a people led to the struggle for freedom. So when they started getting English education and when some developments were there, so major part of Indian educated nationalists started to free India from the jaws of Britishers. So that was called as national movement, that is struggle for freedom. So this was the second part of our chapter. Next is sources of modern Indian history.